New York City, autumn, 1929. The air was alive with money. Stocks were soaring. Millionaires were being made overnight, and the streets of Wall Street pulsed with confidence. America believed it had found the formula for eternal prosperity. But beneath that golden surface, something was breaking, and when it finally shattered, the entire world would tremble. This is the story of the Wall Street crash, the day when greed turned to panic, paper fortunes vanished, and the American dream was left in ruins. A collapse so devastating it didn't just destroy wealth, it reshaped the future of the entire world economy. Welcome to ChronoCapital, where history shapes wealth. To understand the crash, we have to go back to the 1920s, the so-called Roaring Twenties. America had just emerged victorious from World War I. Industry was booming. New inventions, automobiles, radios, airplanes were transforming daily life. For the first time in history, ordinary Americans could invest in the stock market, and they did with blind faith. In just a few short years, the stock market became the new American religion. Brokers promised easy riches. Newspapers called it the unstoppable bull market. People mortgaged their homes, borrowed money, even sold family heirlooms, all to buy shares. It wasn't about investing anymore. It was about gambling on dreams. Credit was easy and confidence was infinite. In 1928 alone, the Dow Jones Industrial Average nearly doubled. Businessmen, bankers, farmers, teachers, everyone thought the market could never fall. Buy now, pay later became the national motto. Cars, radios, homes, all bought on credit. Even stocks were bought with borrowed money, a dangerous strategy known as buying on margin. You could buy $1,000 worth of stock with just $100 cash. The rest, borrowed. As long as prices kept rising, it felt like magic. But if prices fell, even a little, the illusion would crumble overnight. A few experts tried to warn the public. Economist Roger Babson famously said in 1929, "Sooner or later a crash is coming and it may be terrible." Wall Street laughed. Stocks were hitting record highs. Everyone was making money. Who wanted to listen to bad news? But deep down, the system was starting to shake. Production was slowing. Factory inventories were piling up. Wages weren't keeping pace with prices. Americans were buying everything on credit, but their debt was growing faster than their income. The boom wasn't built on wealth, it was built on borrowed time. By the summer of 1929, the market was at its absolute peak. The Dow stood at 381 points, an all-time high. Everyone believed the future would only get brighter. But in late September, the first cracks appeared. Steel production dropped. Car sales slowed. The Federal Reserve warned that speculation was out of control. Yet investors ignored the warnings. They said, it's just a small correction. But history was preparing its biggest correction yet. October 1929, the month that would rewrite economic history. At first, the decline was small, a few points here and there, but panic spreads faster than logic. On October 24th, Black Thursday, the market lost 11% of its value in one day. Crowds gathered outside the New York Stock Exchange, shouting, sweating, begging for answers. Inside, brokers were overwhelmed. Phones rang nonstop. Sell orders flooded the floor. Banks tried to calm the storm. Big names like JP Morgan and Co. stepped in to buy shares, trying to stop the collapse. For a moment, it worked. The market recovered slightly, but the damage was already done. Fear had entered the bloodstream of Wall Street, and once fear begins, greed dies. In just a few days, America would witness the most destructive financial crash in its history, and nothing, not the banks, not the government, not even the millionaires, could stop it. Part 2, Black Tuesday, the day the market died. 1930, America stood in silence. The music of the Roaring Twenties had stopped. The champagne bubbles had gone flat, and in its place, hunger, fear, and dust. The crash of 1929 hadn't just destroyed wealth, it had destroyed faith. Banks were gone, jobs were gone, hope was fading. By 1933, nearly 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed. It wasn't called the Great Depression yet, but everyone knew they were living through something no one had ever seen before. Cities became ghost towns. Men stood in lines miles long for a bowl of soup or a piece of bread. Once proud businessmen sold apples on street corners just to survive. Families packed up and left, searching for work, for food, for dignity. They called them Hoovervilles, named bitterly after the man in the White House, President Herbert Hoover. To many, he had become a symbol of inaction. He believed the economy would fix itself, but as the years dragged on, the suffering only deepened. As if the crash wasn't enough, another disaster struck. In the early 1930s, America's heartland turned to dust. Years of over-farming and drought created a perfect storm. Massive dust clouds that swallowed entire towns. Crops failed, cattle died, families abandoned their farms, heading west in search of a new beginning. John Steinbeck would later call them the Dust Bowl refugees. But to them, it was simply survival. In March 1933, a new leader stepped forward, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His voice on the radio carried hope into homes that had long gone silent. He promised action, change, rebirth, and above all, a new deal for the American people. His first 100 days, Roosevelt launched programs that would redefine the nation. He shut down failing banks, created jobs through massive public works projects, and most importantly, restored faith in the system. The New Deal didn't end the Depression overnight, but it gave America something priceless: belief. The 1930s became a decade of rebuilding. Bridges rose, dams were built, highways stretched across the country. For the first time, the government stood not as a distant power, but as a partner in survival. Millions found work through programs like the CCC and WPA, planting trees, paving roads, and painting murals that told the story of a wounded but unbroken people. The message was clear: America would not be defined by its fall, but by how it rose again. The lessons of the crash reshaped finance forever. The Glass-Steagall Act separated banks from risky investments. The FDIC guaranteed savings, restoring trust in the banking system. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, was created to watch over Wall Street, ensuring that greed would never again go unchecked. These reforms built the foundation for the modern American economy. Stronger, smarter, and more aware of its own fragility. Slowly, America began to heal. The stock market stabilized. Confidence in that fragile heartbeat of capitalism began to return. By the late 1930s, jobs were coming back. Hope was creeping in again. And then, history threw one more curveball. World War II. The war effort pulled America out of the Depression completely. Factories roared back to life. Millions found work producing weapons, tanks, planes. The tragedy of war became paradoxically the engine of recovery. The Wall Street crash of 1929 was more than a financial event. It was a mirror, reflecting both the brilliance and the blindness of human ambition. It taught the world that unchecked greed can destroy even the mightiest of nations. But it also showed that resilience, the courage to rebuild, can bring a nation back from the ashes. Every time the markets rise, every time a bubble forms, echoes of 1929 whisper through Wall Street's marble halls. The lessons of that crash still live in every regulation, every headline, every heartbeat of global finance. History doesn't just repeat, it reminds. The story of 1929 isn't a warning from the past. It's a mirror held up to our present, because no matter how advanced our markets become, one truth remains timeless. Prosperity without balance always ends in collapse. This has been the Wall Street crash, the day America's dream exploded. You've been watching ChronoCapital, where history shapes wealth. October 29th, 1929. The day began like any other on Wall Street. The sun rose over Manhattan, shining off the golden towers of prosperity. But beneath that light, the darkest day in American economic history was about to unfold. The New York Stock Exchange opened at 9:30 a.m. Within minutes, chaos erupted. Traders rushed to sell. Phones rang endlessly. Brokers shouted prices that no one wanted to hear. The ticker tape and that endless stream of numbers fell hopelessly behind. By the time a price printed, it was already worthless. Millions of shares flooded the market. Panic had replaced logic. Everyone wanted out, but there were no buyers left. The scene on Wall Street was pure pandemonium. Reporters described it as a hurricane of selling. People screamed, pushed, begged for answers, but no one could stop the fall. By midday, 16 million shares had changed hands, a record never seen before. Stocks worth billions just days ago were now worthless paper. Giant corporations, U.S. Steel, General Electric, AT&T, collapsed in minutes. The mighty Dow Jones plunged 23% in 2 days. The impossible had happened. The American dream had exploded. The financial crash wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was millions of lives shattering overnight. People who had invested everything in their savings, their homes, their futures were suddenly broke. The word millionaire vanished from the American vocabulary. Margin calls wiped out investors. Banks demanded money people didn't have. Families lost their homes. Factories closed. Bread lines formed in cities that once symbolized prosper. Suicide rates rose sharply. On Wall Street, police patrolled rooftops, afraid that desperate men might jump. Newspapers avoided reporting the full scale of tragedy, but everyone knew someone who had lost everything. In the days following the crash, the panic spread beyond Wall Street. Ordinary citizens rushed to withdraw their savings, but the banks didn't have enough cash. Their money was in the same markets that had collapsed. More than 9,000 banks failed in the years that followed. Lifetimes of savings vanished overnight. The very institutions that symbolized safety were now symbols of betrayal. America's financial system, once the pride of the world, was suddenly fragile, broken, and full of fear. President Herbert Hoover tried to calm the storm. He told the nation, the fundamental business of the country is on a sound and prosperous basis. But behind the optimism, the reality was brutal. Businesses were shutting down. Unemployment was rising fast. By early 1930, more than 4 million Americans were out of work. A year later, 8 million. The roaring engine of American progress had stopped cold. Confidence in the invisible fuel of capitalism had disappeared. No one trusted the banks. No one trusted the market. And the word prosperity became a cruel joke. Across America, people bartered goods, shared food, and struggled to survive. Farmers burned crops they couldn't sell. Children went hungry while grain rotted in storage. The land of opportunity had turned into a land of despair. The world follows America down, but the crash didn't stop at America's borders. The United States was the world's largest creditor. When America fell, the world economy followed. Europe's fragile post-war recovery collapsed. Germany's financial system imploded, fueling anger, nationalism, and the rise of extremism. By the early 1930s, unemployment spread across continents. The Great Depression had become a global catastrophe. In just a few years, the crash of 1929 had reshaped not only America, but the entire world order. By the early 1930s, the chaos had given way to silence. The ticker machines stopped printing. Wall Street, once a temple of triumph, now stood as a monument to failure. America was left to ask one haunting question. How did this happen? The truth was simple. It wasn't just numbers that crashed. It was belief. The belief that the good times would last forever. The belief that money could never run out. And the belief that human greed had no cost. The Wall Street crash wasn't just the end of a financial era. It was the end of American innocence.